Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this 40-hour RBT course training experience. We're so excited that you guys decided to join us in your learning experience. And basically, this part of the course is to give you an overview of all the material you're going to be seeing throughout the whole entire course, summarized in a couple of pages, just to kind of get you a feel of what it is that you're going to be expecting throughout your experience in this course. If you want to take very well outlined notes of each section to kind of guide you through your learning process through the 40-hour course, this is a great time to do so. This section, like I said, summarizes everything in very brief details, so it's very good for cheat sheet purposes. Now, first thing that you're going to see here on this list is Section A, Measurement. We have Section A1, Prepare for Data Collection. These are just some 4 simple things that you need to know when you're preparing for data collection. You have to make sure that you read the data from the previous session. You want to make sure you're in touch with the history of the client. You want to know their past information. You want to make sure that you know if they have any medical issues. You want to make sure that you have all of this information ready for you before you start the session. Next thing is that you want to determine what programs you plan to work on during the session. You want to make sure you have your programs in place. You want to know what it is specifically that you're going to be working with. Remember that throughout your experience as an RBT, which is what you're going to be once you're done taking this course and taking your exam, you're going to have a supervisor. So you're going to have someone that's supervising you throughout the experience that you're going to be having as an RBT. So your supervisor is the one that's going to guide you into what it is that you're going to be having in this plan and how it is that you're going to be implementing each of these programs. So make sure that you and your supervisors are BFFs and you guys are going through the plan together and you know exactly what to expect and what is expected of you while you engage in your journey as an RBT with your clients. You want to make sure you have your materials ready. So make sure you know what behaviors you're going to be targeting and how you're going to be measuring these behaviors. So remember, we have various ways to measure each behavior. So you need to know if you're going to be measuring time, you need to make sure that you're going to have a stopwatch in hand. If you're going to be tallying, you need to make sure that you're going to have tallies, a piece of paper, a pen, whatever it is that you're going to be using to collect data. You need to make sure you have all that stuff with you and prepared. And lastly, you want to take data and notes as you go throughout your session. As soon as the behavior occurs, as soon as there's occurrence of behavior, you want to take that data as immediately as you possibly can. Taking too long to jot down whatever it is that you're observing is going to mess up your data because it won't be as accurate as it should be. So accuracy has to do with immediacy. So you want to always have all these documents with you right in front of you so you can get right to it. Okay, so now let's move on to a quick overview of Section A2. So Section A2 basically refers to the section where we're going to talk about continuous measurement. So continuous measurement records all of the behavior as it actually occurs during an observation. This can be done by direct observation. So when we're doing continuous measurement, we're collecting data directly. We're observing the behavior as it's occurring right in front of us directly. We're the observers and we're watching each instance of the behavior occur and we're taking either tallies or using a stopwatch, whatever it is, we're collecting data on that as it's occurring right in front of us. Something you're going to be looking into, and one of the various ways to collect continuous measurement is using ABC data collection. So for needs to know, ABC stands for antecedent behavior consequence. Antecedent is what happens prior to the behavior. The behavior is the target, whatever it is that you're targeting. and the consequences, what happens after the target behavior. So things that are going to go along with the ABC data collection or ABC narrative and ABC continuous recording. ABC narrative recording refers to collecting ABC data on the target behavior in naturally occurring environment, only what you can directly observe. So you're recording basically a story. Whenever you think about narrative, I want you to think about a story. So detailed explanation of what happened prior to the behavior, what the target behavior is, and what happened after. And ABC continuous recording is a form of recording behavior as well, where we're going to be recording the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence as well. But for purposes of ABC continuous recording, this is kind of like when we already have more or less an idea of the details. So we know possible antecedents of the behavior, we know possible behaviors that the individual can do, and we know possible consequences. So for this kind of procedure, you can see something like a checklist. So you can check off something like antecedent was tablet. The behavior for this situation was tantrum, and the consequence was ignore. That would be what you see for an ABC continuous recording. So this is kind of like when we have an idea of what already the most known behaviors are. Next section. So we're branching off from section A2. Another important section of section A2 is the dimensional quantities. When we're talking about dimensional quantities, we're talking about repeatability. We're talking about a temporal extent. We're talking about temporal locus. When we're referring specifically to repeatability, something is repeating, right? So repeatability is repetition. So a behavior that's occurring continuously. So there's two that you want to look into when we're talking about repeatability, and that is frequency, aka also known as count. So frequency, the dimensional quantity under repeatability, that refers to tallying how many times the behavior occurs. So we're just tallying, counting. So the behavior occurred, we're making a tally. Rate is frequency over a time period. So for rate, we care about an amount of time. So we're counting a behavior, 3 behaviors of maybe snapping over an amount of time, over 10-minute interval, for example, over 10 minutes. So in 10 minutes, they snapped 3 times. It's when we care about how many times the individual did the behavior within a certain time period. The next measurement that we're going to be looking at here is duration. So when we're talking about duration, think about temporal extent, which has to do with time, how much time. So the total extent of time in which behavior occurs, that is duration. So we want to know amount of time. So if they are yelling and we care about how long the individual yells for, we're going to be collecting duration. So they yelled for 2 consecutive minutes. Next measurement system that we have here is latency. Latency is time from onset of stimulus to initiation of response. So if I give you a cue, I give you a prompt to do something, how long does it take you to start the response once a cue is provided? So, hey, go clean your room. How long does it take Timmy to go clean his room after I told Timmy to go clean their room? Latency and inter-response time, which is the last measurement system that we're going to be talking about, are temporal locus, because this has to do with location. Temporal locus has to do with location. We care about the behavior occurring at a certain time frame during a certain time period. So inter-response time, abbreviated IRT, it's the time between the end of one response and the beginning of the same response. So we care about that in-between time. the time in between. That's what we care about when we're talking about inter-response time. The time between. So the end, you start your timer. As soon as the behavior ends, you start your timer. And then when it begins again, you stop your timer. That is how you will collect inter-response time. So the time between two responses. Next section we have is section A3, discontinuous measurement. So discontinuous measurement records a sample of the behavior during an observation. It measures occurrences versus non-occurrences of behavior, and behavior may not be detected. We're going to be looking at partial interval, whole interval, and momentary time sampling. These are the three discontinuous measurement procedures. So, partial interval, whole interval, and momentary time sampling. So partial, most important thing that you have to take out of partial is that we care that the behavior happened at least once. We're recording for 1 minute. As long as the behavior occurred, even if this is the interval right here that we're looking at, this is a 1 minute interval, the behavior occurred right here in this beginning part of the interval, it's considered a yes for partial interval. This is something that overestimates behavior. Next, we have whole interval. We care about the behavior happening the entire time. Same scenario, 1 minute. It would have to occur during the whole entire interval for us to mark a yes. This is something that underestimates behavior. And lastly, we have momentary time sampling. We care that the behavior happened at the end of the interval. This is something that under or overestimates behavior or neither. So if we're looking at the time frame, 1 minute interval, we only care that when we're checking in, it's happening right at the end. Okay. So let's continue on to the next section. Section A4. Remember guys, this is just an overview of all the material. We're going to go into deep detail about all of this. This is so you guys can jot down some key terms, so you guys can pause the video, so you guys can take your good notes, so you guys can have some type of cheat sheet while you guys are going throughout the whole entire course presentation. Remember, it's a 40-hour long course. So this is kind of like a summary of everything for you guys to have an idea, an outline basically of the whole entire course. So you guys aren't completely lost throughout the whole entire presentation. Because at the end, everything does connect. So it's better so you guys can have some type of outline to follow. So section A4 is permanent product recording. This is different from other data collection procedures because it does not involve measuring the actual behavior. You're going to be measuring some physical product that the behavior produced. You're going to record at a later time when convenient. So this type of measuring procedure is very convenient for the simple fact that you don't have to record right now, you can record later. And it's not going to be recording the actual behavior, we're going to be recording a product of the behavior. So for example, when you get a test and the professor wants to see you get an A+, because that's what's going to measure if you studied or not. Section A5, enter data and update graphs. All right, so most importantly, updating graphs and entering data is important because we use this to interpret progress, success, or failure. There's 3 ways to visually interpret your data and your graphs, and that's through level, trend, and variability. Level is the range between the lowest data point in the set and the highest. Trend is something that you want to do when you draw a line through data points closest to matching each point. And variability is how consistent the data points are to each other. So right here, we have a little picture of a graph showing you more or less what would you expect for level, which would be high. High would look something like this, basically that if you're comparing if this was baseline and this is a treatment, if we're comparing, we want to see that they started at high levels and maybe now they're at moderate levels or low levels. So basically where they're at. And then trend is either if we're increasing, decreasing, accelerating, decelerating, or no trend. And lastly, we have variability right over here. So for purposes of just showing you guys the examples, we kind of combined it together. You won't really see data like this, but we combined it together just so you guys can see the difference. This line right here is showing stability. This is how we actually want our data to look. We want it to be stable. We want the points to look like this. This is not realistic. This means that we're doing something wrong. Something isn't processing correctly. Whatever we're implementing is not working, or they're not stable. So it's going to be difficult for us to figure out what the control is. But that is what variability tells us. It tells us if we're out of control or not. So some types of graphs that you're going to be seeing are line graphs, which are the most common. You might see some bar graphs. Bar graphs are used to summarize information, summarize data. You might see some cumulative record graphs. This is a type of graph that's never going to decrease. Once again, I'll show you guys examples of what this looks like as we go through the 40-hour course. You'll see some examples to understand. But basically, it's going to be a cumulative accumulation of data, basically, and it's going to be increasing somehow, basically showing that the individual is reaching some type of goal. This type of graph never decreases because it's supposed to be steps, things that can be unlearned. So you can't unlearn how to ride a bike. You can't unlearn how to brush your teeth. So steps that you gradually increase in or you stay stable. Something else that we're going to go into much detail are the key parts of a graph. Kind of have it outlined right here. So basically, you have the X and Y axis, Y, X. You have data points. You have to know that these things are called like that. These are the data points. You have the phase change lines, which would be this. You can have them dotted or solid. And lastly, we have the phase labels. All right, so next we have section A6, describe behavior and environment. Guys, we are halfway there. Keep up with me. I know it's a lot of content starting off so freshly, but I promise you guys that this is going to help you guys a lot, summarizing all the information. So hang in there. Behavior definitions must be observable and measurable, described well enough for another to be able to independently track occurrence of behavior with accuracy. The more precise the definition is, the more accurate the recording of the data is likely to be. And we want to avoid mental descriptions such as sad, mean, bad, angry, and happy. We're going to see some detailed explanations of this. We're going to see some scenario examples of this as well, so you guys can get a full-on understanding of what we mean by describing behavior and the environment in observable and measurable terms. So stay tuned for that as the presentation continues. All right, guys, so now we're in section B, assessment. So B1 refers to conduct preference assessment. So consequence to deliver to learner that may likely work as reinforcer. So here we want to determine the possible reinforcers. We want to see what the individual prefers. So we conduct assessments to be able to understand what it is that individuals like. What do they enjoy? What do they prefer? What can work as a reinforcer? How can we motivate the individual? There's a couple of ways that we can do that. We can ask the person, we can do trial-based methods, or we can observe the person. You're asking the person, you can do open-ended questions, choice format, rank ordering. Trial-based methods would be single stimulus, paired stimulus, aka forced choice, multiple stimulus, and multiple stimulus could be multiple stimulus with replacement or without. In more detail, we'll explain each of these and how they look like, and we'll do some examples together when the 40-hour training section gets to section B1. So stay tuned for that. And lastly, you can observe the person. It could be contrived free operant or naturalistic free operant. Contrived is where we're going to have them in their natural environment, but we're going to have a little bit of control. And naturalistic free operant is where we're not going to have any control. We're just going to follow the individual around and observe what it is that they play with. Next section is section B2. Assist with individualized assessment procedures. So I want you guys to keep in mind that the individualized assessment is basically like your Bible. This is your go-to. This is where all the individual's information is going to be. You're going to see the skill accusations in there. You're going to see the goals. You're going to see the assessments. You're going to see the functional assessments. You're going to see their history. Everything that you need to know about the individual is going to be in the individualized behavior plan. All that information is going to be right in there in a big old packet for you to refer to as you are working with your client. So clarify here that it says assist. So whenever these individualized assessment procedures are conducted, you are going to be working hand in hand with your supervisor, aka, BCBA or BCABA, whoever it is that you're working with together. And you guys are going to be conducting this. You guys are going to be observing behaviors. You guys are going to be collecting data together, and you're going to be helping out in creating this plan. You will never create this alone as an RBT. You're going to be assisting. So each client receives an IBP. This is abbreviation, so you might see it like that, IBP. So make sure you know that. Is a tailored assessment of behavior that is tailored specifically to their individual behavior. We are very big on individualized. This is like our favorite word, okay? And the reason why we're so big on individualized is because what works for one individual may not work for another. One treatment plan that works with one individual just because they have tantrums, for example, does not mean that it's going to work for another individual that also has tantrums. We can have similar ideas, but we're never going to have the same exact thing because everyone is different. Everyone behaves different. Everyone's tantrum is for a different function. So we need to keep that in mind, that individualized is very important. So in there, we're going to have their settings, their complexity, the interventions, maintenance, all of that. Section B3, functional assessment procedures. So this is a very, very brief, right to the point summary of what functional assessment procedures are. So the IBP, how you see up top, this is the Bible. This is going to be your booklet. Functional assessment procedures, basically kind of like how we get all the information that we get on the individual. So there's the FBA, this is the umbrella. The FBA is the umbrella of everything. This is the top of the umbrella. So we do functional behavior assessment. This is how we determine the cause and effect relationship between the environment and the behavior. Just for needs to know, BX means behavior. And we can collect functional behavior assessment information through indirect assessment, which basically means through interviews, checklists, rating scales, questionnaires, where we obtain the information from individuals familiar with the client. So we won't be observing them us directly. We're going to be collecting data from others that are familiar with the client's behavior, such as teachers, parents, whoever it is that is in contact with the individual. We will ask them questions. We will give them questionnaires, rating scales, whatever it is, that will be how this is conducted. The next type of functional assessment procedure that we can use is direct descriptive FA, or direct descriptive or just descriptive FA. So this is the direct observation of behavior under naturally occurring conditions. This is us directly observing the behavior and collecting data. And then last, we have experimental, which is the functional analysis. This is when we're going to arrange antecedents and consequences. So separate effects on the behavior are observed and behavior function is determined. So just like how it says, this is the experimental, this is a functional analysis, FA. We are going to be messing around with the antecedents and consequence to determine the true function of the behavior. This is obviously the most accurate, but it's not always the easiest to perform as it involves a lot of control and a lot of time. Next section we have is C1 and C2. We have it here combined because remember, this is an overview. We're already on section C. So section C, skill accusation, components of a skill accusation plan. So these are the components that you're going to find in a skill accusation plan. You're going to see the definition of the skill to be acquired. You're going to have a baseline measurement of skill or the behavior replacing it. You're going to have clear goal. So a clear goal that indicates a skill accusation. You're going to have detailed description of the procedures. You're going to have reactive strategies to employ. So whatever strategies it is that you should be using throughout your intervention. You're going to have a bunch of data collection, and you're going to have display methods used. You're going to have all the methods that you can use for your data collection. Number 7, you're going to have a frequent review of data and circumstances in order to make minor adjustments to the plan. So frequently, you're going to be meeting with your supervisor. Frequently, you and your supervisor are going to be keeping in communication, and you guys are going to review the data because we want to make sure that if Timmy likes to play with his toys, he still likes to play with his toys. Remember that behavior changes consecutively. Behavior is always changing. So what you like today, you may not like tomorrow. And same thing works with all the skills. And also if we meet any goals, all of these things have to be reviewed consecutively and frequently to make sure that we're up to date with our plans and our goals. And lastly, a plan for maintenance and termination of services. Section C3, contingencies of reinforcement. You have unconditioned reinforcement, which is a stimulus change that increases the future frequency of behavior, also known as a primary reinforcer. Is something that we need to survive. So whenever you think about unconditioned reinforcement, think of something that you need to survive. There's no learning history. Examples of this are like food, water, shelter, and warmth. Conditioned reinforcement is a stimulus reinforcer or strength set behavior through its association with a primary reinforcer. So through association, conditioned reinforcers are established. It's something that's learned, and it increases the future likelihood that the behavior will occur. Next, we have unconditioned punishment. Once again, unconditioned, think unlearned. Unlearned punishment, things that decrease your behavior in the future, such as pain. We don't have to learn to feel pain, we just do. Too much light, excessive cold or heat, loud sounds. So more than anything, think about reflective actions when you're thinking about unconditioned punishment. So if you're having some type of reflex to something, think unconditioned punishment. And lastly, we have conditioned punishment. So this is a learned punishment. Learn that something previously natural became a possible source of pain. Pain for the example of this, but basically is that you learn that something can cause something. So if you learn that something can cause pain, you avoid it. You engage in some type of behavior where you're going to avoid maybe putting your hand on a hot stove. You learn that that causes pain from previous association with it. So you had to have experienced it in the past in order for it to be considered a conditioned punishment. Next, we have continuous schedule of reinforcement, abbreviated CRF. It's reinforced after every instance of the target behavior. So reinforcement is received after every instance of the target behavior. This is used to teach new behaviors. You want to think about fixed schedules, and they are more easily extinguished. Next, we have the intermittent schedule of reinforcement, abbreviated INT, reinforced after some responses, but not after every single target behavior. This is applied to maintain behavior, and you want to think about variable/intermittent schedules. These are the ones that are more resistant to extinction. Okay, so here we have fixed ratio, fixed interval, variable ratio, and variable interval. So just keep in mind that these are continuous schedules of reinforcement and intermittent schedules of reinforcement, part of the contingencies of reinforcement. So when you think about fixed, I want you to memorize in your brain that fixed is set, variable is average, interval is passage of time, and ratio is number of occurrences. So fixed ratio is a set number of occurrences. It's abbreviated FR. Variable ratio is an average number of occurrences, abbreviated VR. Fixed interval is a set time, fixed interval, FI, abbreviated that way. Variable interval, average time, VI. Section C4, discrete trial teaching or a discrete trial training. All right, so abbreviated DTT. This is a teaching method in which learning trials are presented in a quick succession with a clear beginning and a clear end to each trial. It produces rapid learning. Many learning opportunities can be presented quickly because learning is teacher directed. So this is something that's going to be fast paced. It's teacher directed. You have one opportunity on its own to respond. What does that mean? If I ask you what is 6 plus 4, you have to either tell me the correct answer or you give me the incorrect answer. There's only one opportunity to get the correct response. And this is how it would look like. You have an instruction that's delivered or a cue. So, hey, what's this? The learner responds either correct or incorrect. And then the consequence is delivered. All this information gets tallied in a document, and then the session restarts again, the next trial. So DTT is compared to naturalistic teaching procedures, aka incidental teaching, because they are similar but completely opposites of each other. This is another type of teaching procedure where the child's daily activities and routines in their natural environment indicate how and where the therapist works with the client. This one is actually child-directed learning, and it evokes the learner's speech. So this is good for MO, using MOs, motivating operations, manding, which is asking for things that they want or need. It's a type of teaching procedure that can guide an individual to speak, to ask for things that they want, to mand. This type of teaching procedure allows for various opportunities. So you have a million chances to be able to obtain the correct response. Next, here we continue on to a summary of section C6. Task analysis chaining procedures. So breaking down a complex skill or behavior into individual steps. That is like the main idea of what a task analysis is. So this is the top of the umbrella. This is what we're doing. We need to do this before we can jump into chaining procedures. So when we do a task analysis, we conduct a task analysis in order to be able to. So the task analysis has to be completed first by either observing the individual do it, by observing someone competent in the skill doing it, whatever it takes for you to be able to determine the steps that the individual has to do in order to be able to do that skill, where you can devise that plan. Once you have those steps acquired and you know exactly what they're supposed to look like, then you can go ahead and test it out on the individual and determine the chaining procedure that you can proceed with to use with that individual. So chaining is used to teach independent living skills or to add to an existing repertoire. It can be combined with prompting, instructing, and reinforcement. So there are some factors that affect the performance of a behavior chain. The completeness of a task analysis, the length and complexity of the chain, schedule of reinforcement, stimulus and response variation. So there are 3 types of chaining procedures that can be used. There's forward chaining, backwards chaining, and total task presentation. So first and foremost, forward chaining is when reinforcement for the completion of one step is the introduction for the next step. Think about this right here, and it'll help you understand it better. So step 1 is introduced. Step 1 is mastered by the individual. Then they proceed to doing steps 1 and 2. Once step 1 and 2 are mastered, then they proceed on to doing steps 1, 2, and 3, and so on and so forth. So most importantly, keep in mind that for forward chaining, the steps will be completed in order. Next, we have backwards chaining. Just like how the name says, the task will be completed backwards. You should slowly model each step for the client until the last one. The client will receive reinforcement for the first step completed. So basically how it would go is that the RBT does steps 1 through 9, and then client does step 10, and so on and so forth. Then client does steps 10 and 9, and the RBT does steps 1 through 8. But basically, this whole entire thing is going to be completed every single time whenever you implement a backwards chaining procedure, and the client will continue on to do the last steps. Total task presentation is that the client will perform all steps with necessary prompts in order to complete the entire chain. So here they will basically be doing the whole entire thing themselves with some prompts. Section C7, implement discrimination training. So discrimination training is a procedure in which the responses are reinforced in the presence of one stimulus condition, SD, but not in the presence of the other stimulus, as delta. Very quick example to kind of put you into perspective. We're going to go into a lot more details with discrimination training as we go through on our 40-hour course presentation. But once again, this is an outline. This is a summary of all the information. So if you don't get it right now, don't worry about it, just for purposes of introducing all the material to you before you really jump into it. Example, you want to teach an individual not to steal. You have 2 cookie jars, one with a warning label and one regular, no warning label. The one without a warning label would be the SD. This sets the occasion for reinforcement. The one with the warning label will be an S delta, stimulus delta, which sets the occasion for extinction. The student taught to only eat cookies from the container without the warning label. So basically, we're teaching them that reinforcement will be obtained if they get cookies from the cookie jar that does not have a warning sign. If they try to get cookies from the one that does have a warning sign, they will not receive reinforcement. Right here, this is an example of discrimination training as well, where we're able to see that these are all shades of green and this is blue. And basically you're able to tell the difference that this is a group of green and we're all talking about colors, but these are green, shades of green, and they're different greens. But this is a shade of color, but it's blue, has nothing to do with the shades of green. Next section is section C8, stimulus control transfer procedures. So stimulus control, first and foremost, what the heck is that? So stimulus control is when a particular behavior has been reinforced only in the presence of that particular stimulus or instruction. That behavior begins to occur reliably in the presence of that stimulus or instruction. So basically you can kind of think of discrimination training kind of like falling into stimulus control. All of this kind of ties in together to be able to create this, to be able to have this. So once we can teach them to tell the difference, we can start to get them to have stimulus control. So we can gain control over a stimulus. Being able to have control over that particular stimulus or instruction is what allows us to reliably have that behavior occur with the presence of that stimulus or condition. So this is very important in ABA. We need to have stimulus control. That's basically how we're able to do whatever it is that we do with behavior. Okay, so right over here, we have a quick tip just for needs to know. It doesn't really have to do with stimulus control, but it's right here. So this is comparing SD versus MO. SD versus MO right now might not be clear to you because we haven't gone into deep detail about it, but I think this is the most simplest and accurate way to see it. So you guys might come back to this video after you guys are done with the course to kind of reference it for your exam, because this is a good outline of all the material that really kind of pinpoints everything to the easiest point possible. So SD is a response in the presence of an SD must produce more reinforcement than it does in the absence. So SD and MO, they both occur before the behavior and bring about behavior. These are two terms that get confused one with another. SD and MO, they both happen before, so they're both antecedents. And they both bring about behavior. They make behavior occur. But SD is a response in the presence of an SD must produce more reinforcement. So more reinforcement must be produced when it is present. So something is present, reinforcement is produced. MO changes the value of something. Here we have an example. Not hungry, do not want food, no MO for food. If you're hungry, MO, and pass a McDonald's, SD, you go eat. All right, so right here on the tippy top, we have a very quick explanation of stimulus generalization and stimulus discrimination. Some very difficult terms to differentiate in this field. So once again, if you don't understand it now, don't worry, you will by the end of this 40-hour course. This is just a quick preview. So stimulus generalization, you're gonna have loose stimulus control. We're talking about within, and the example here is all shades of green. So we're talking about green, all the shades of green. We're talking about a general subject of green, and you're able to see that there is different shades of green and they all fall under green. Then we have stimulus discrimination that has a tight stimulus control that's between, across, and the example is green versus other colors. So here we're able to tell the difference that this is green and all the other colors are other colors. Section C9, implement prompt and prompt feeding procedures. A prompt is a supplementary stimulus that is used to occasion a response. Just think about prompt as extra help, some aid. So there's stimulus prompts and there's also response prompts. Stimulus prompts include positioning, movement, pairing, stimulus prompts and response prompts are the two types of prompts that can be used. So stimulus prompts are positioning, movement, pairing. Response prompts are physical prompt, modeling prompt, verbal prompt, and gestural prompt. So stimulus prompts act on the stimulus and response prompts act on the behavior or the response. So the prompt fitting procedures are least to most, abbreviated LTM. So fewer prompts are provided in the beginning and gradually more intrusive prompts are faded as help is needed. Then there's most to least, abbreviated MTL, which is the opposite of this. So obviously more prompts in the beginning and then they're gradually reduced. This is also known as errorless learning. And then we have time delay, where insert delay that occurs after the instruction, but before the prompt. Next section, we have section C10, focuses on generalization and maintenance procedures. Two things that you're going to be seeing in this section are more information on stimulus generalization and response generalization. We're going to go into more detail with these two key terms when we go into the 40-hour course and we go into these specific key terms. There's like a lot of information that you guys need to know about this. So we're just going to mention them here and that they're part of the generalization and maintenance procedures. Maintenance, skill accusation or behavior reduction maintains across time after skill, behavior no longer being targeted. So this is what we care for. We want to aim for these three things right here. We want to have maintenance. So once we're no longer there, the procedures that we're implementing are terminated. Once our therapy is terminated, we want to aim for maintenance. We want to make sure that whatever we implemented stays. And we want to aim for generalization. Whatever we're teaching in one scenario, one condition, one situation with one behavior, we want it to generalize to others. Section C11 focuses on shaping procedures. Mostly what you need to know is that you reinforce successive approximations of the target behavior. Section C12 is the token economy or the token reinforcement. This helps students visualize progress, accept, and work for delay reinforcement. They learn to self-monitor and learn to regulate behavior. It's a very useful procedure that we use to maintain and to motivate individuals. So finally, we're already on section D, behavior reduction. Section D1 focuses on replacements. So what are replacements? Replacements in any behavior plan, we have to have replacements. If there's any behavior that's going to be reduced, there has to be a replacement put in its place. So behavior reductions plan must include a replacement behavior that will be reinforced, and behavior analysis should consider using reinforcement as part of any intervention plan. There are components of a behavior reduction plan, and they're right here. You guys have to know these components of the behavior reduction plan, just like how you have to know the skill accusation components as well. So some of the components that you will see in the behavior reduction plan will be identify, describe, and create goals for behavior in observable terms. You're going to see the antecedent consequences that may maintain behavior. You're going to see the hypothesis of function of behavior. You're going to see possible replacement behaviors, antecedent consequences based on intervention. You're going to create crisis intervention plan. There's going to be implementation, modification, generalization, and maintenance as well. Ignore this for now. So section D2. Section D2 focuses on functions of behavior. There are four possible functions of behavior. There's attention, tangible, escape/avoidance, and sensory. Just keep in mind, note that many behaviors may have more than one function. Next, we have section D3, interventions based on modifications of antecedents. So we're back to talking about motivating operations and SDs again. These have to do with antecedents and the modifications that we make on it. So specifically, antecedent modifications refers to changing some aspect of the learner's environment to prevent challenging behavior. So we want to help avoid challenging behaviors. Non-contingent reinforcement is one of those antecedent modifications that we can use. Non-contingent reinforcement, NCR. This is when reinforcement is given to the learner, free, not contingent on any behavior delivered according to passage of time. So non-contingent reinforcement is receiving reinforcement based on time. Does not matter if the individual is doing the behavior that we want them to do or not. It's just based on a time period. An example of this is like when we give a break to avoid escape behavior. So we give a break every 5 minutes, regardless of the behavior that they're engaging in. Next section is section D4. And this section focuses on differential reinforcement. This is when we're reinforcing desired behavior while withholding reinforcement for an undesirable behavior. That is what differential reinforcement is. So we're giving reinforcement on one behavior and withholding reinforcement for another behavior. So DRI, DRO, and DRA are types of differential reinforcement that we use. DRI is differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. This uses replacement behavior that cannot be performed at the same time as the target behavior. DRO is differential reinforcement of other behavior. This depends on a time interval and is usually set in which reinforcement is contingent on the target behavior not being observed. So reinforcement will be given as long as the behavior that is being targeted is absent. Next, we have DRA, differential reinforcement of an alternative behavior. So DRA, differential reinforcement of an alternative behavior, is when we're going to give reinforcement to a functional alternative to the behavior. Next section is section D5, and this section focuses on extinction procedures. So let's get familiar with extinction and all the other terms that go along with extinction. So extinction is reinforcement of a previously reinforced behavior is discontinued, which results in a decrease in frequency of the behavior. In other words, something that used to receive reinforcement is no longer going to receive reinforcement. Things that follow the extinction procedure are extinction bursts, which is a predictable or temporary increase in the rate and intensity of a behavior when an extinction procedure is first used. So this is a common side effect of extinction. It's part of the process. Once extinction is first implemented, this is something that is usually going to occur right after. Another term that goes along with extinction is spontaneous recovery. This is when a behavior reappears after it has decreased or stopped entirely during extinction procedure. So just like how the term says, this is when Extinction happens, the behavior is barely occurring and literally went away. And then all of a sudden it makes a comeback out of nowhere. Something triggers it. That's what spontaneous recovery is. Next section we have is section D6. This is the crisis emergency procedure. Remember, this is part of the behavior reduction section. Basically, crisis emergency procedures are things that we're going to see, procedures that we can use if you're ever going to be dealing with SIB behaviors, so self-injurious behaviors. You're going to see some type of crisis emergency procedures implemented in that plan. You're going to be able to consider if you can use blocks or preventions, if you should consider using restraints, which would be the last resort when a person is endangered to self or others. If we ever were to use restraints, we want to discontinue it as quickly as possible. Next, we have documenting and reporting. I believe this is already another section. I'm not 100% sure what section it is that this is, but basically documentation and recording in short summary is that you're required to meet with the supervisor at least twice per month. 5% of your worked hours must be supervised. And you have to maintain regular communication with your supervisor. When in doubt, you want to call your supervisor. So that's basically the end of this overview. Once again, we didn't cover everything that you need to know, but this is just an outline and an overview just to get you started and warmed up into the course. I really hope that this helped and that you guys took your notes. So get ready to get started and to get deep into the 40-hour RBT training.